Okay, Athena, we're live.
Hi, everyone. My name is Athena, and I'm a volunteer with Hope for HS. We are here today talking with Jillian Ondreyka. She's going to be giving a presentation on health and nutrition. Jillian is from Embrace Nutrition, and she'll be talking to us about nutrition and HS. So I'm going to hand it right over to Jillian so she can get started with this presentation. I know that everyone is excited to have her. I've seen her show before. It's absolutely fantastic and really informative. Hi, Jillian.
Hi, thanks so much. I just tried to share my screen and it said that someone else is sharing. So,
oh, gotcha. Yep. Here, let's do that.
Okay. There's always got to be a technical difficulty.
Yeah.
But here we go. Should be fine in just a couple of seconds here. All right. So can you see my screen all right?
Yep.
Thumbs up. Okay, great. Thanks so much. So thanks for having me. I'm trying to see if I can see the participant list, and I don't think I can see it from this angle. So I will just, get started. So thanks so much for coming to the talk tonight. My name is Jillian Ondreyka. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I also have my master's degree in public health, and I'm a lactation consultant. And I also have HS myself, which is how I got into this work and researching nutrition and lifestyle factors related to HS, so I can really help others with HS too. So I have a slide about that in a few slides where I'll kind of tell you more about my story. So those are my credentials, and the topic that I have for tonight is actually food sensitivities and HS. This was something that I talked about with Hope for HS a few months ago. That would be a good topic because people do have a lot of questions about it, and it is something that I have some experience in, so I'm happy to share. And I also needed to point out that I am wearing my Hope for HS shirt tonight. So the camera kind of cuts it off, but just had to give a shout out. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I do want to start by saying that I am not an immunologist, but I am familiar with food sensitivity tests and how to work with those results. And I am a certified LEAP therapist, and I choose to use the MRT and LEAP in my private practice. However, I do not have a financial relationship with that lab at all. So this first slide is to really illustrate that tonight's topic is pretty hard and it's complicated and confusing. Immunology is very complex, and of course we never have enough research to really prove or show a clear path for which test is best or which thing is the right thing to do, and it does vary for the individual as well. What works for one person might not work for the next. So of course there's a lot of debate on which test is best, and I don't have all the answers, but I am happy to share my understanding of these topics. So this is an image to portray my story and how I learned that I had food sensitivities when it came to my HS. And one of my food triggers is dairy, and that was how I really came to notice the connection. I went to a dairy farm with my family, and we had a great time. And at the end, we all bought like gallons and gallons of milk, and it was really delicious, and I was drinking a ton of it. And then I noticed that my skin had a lot of flares. So I kind of was like, oh, okay, yeah, I had a ton of milk, and then my skin did not like it. It had a reaction. So that was like the first kind of aha moment for me. And then I went to a conference, the HS Symposium in Detroit, and I met other providers and got some more information about it. And I also had been doing some of the Hope for HS meetings in Detroit, and now of course they're all virtual. And then here I am at a meeting. I think a couple of years ago, I spoke to some of the Hope for HS folks, and I said I was a dietitian and said that I'd love to help out. And they mentioned maybe doing a talk like this, and now it's a reality. So I'm really excited that everything worked out. And as I mentioned, I also have a private practice where I help others figure out how food can affect their HS. So how do you figure out if you have food sensitivities? You have to be a food detective. So I call food journaling your must-have tool because it really is so useful for making these connections. So figuring out what might be triggering your HS and how to manage it, it involves some some work in journaling. And to help you journal, I worked with HS Connect, which is another support group, and we created this HS Slow Your Lifestyle and Food Journal. And this was based on a literature review that I did. I read a bunch of research studies on food in HS, and also lifestyle factors. And everything that you see on the right-hand side that's lifestyle or food are items that were brought out in those research articles as things that could contribute to the HS flares. So that's why we have them here as different points of concern that you can track to see if it does have a connection with your HS. And I'll also say that everyone's is different, and we all have different triggers, and sometimes what a treatment plan that works for one person doesn't work for the next. And so it really is a matter of figuring out what works for you. And so if you're writing a journal, you'll be able to figure out your personal triggers. So there's also a space here for the date, and then comments around if you want to write down any extra information about like what was going on around that time, like if you had a stressful day at work or something like that, you can put that down, because stress can be a trigger for some people. And also, I want to note that there's probably things that we haven't identified yet. There needs to be a lot more research done in HS. So in the area where you can write, you can track other things as well, and you might be able to find a different connection, something that affects your HS. So you might have heard the terms food allergy and food sensitivity, and sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they are actually different. And of course, there is a third one. There is a food intolerance. So this is where we start to get into the more kind of complicated things. So please bear with me. I did my best to explain them. So we do have 3 ways that a food can cause a negative reaction in your body. The first one is called allergy. And so these ones are pretty serious, and they have immediate reactions that can be life-threatening. So these are immune mediated. The mechanism is an IgE. This is a type 1 hypersensitivity, which is anaphylaxis, and the symptoms are an obvious immune reaction such as the hives, itching, swelling, and then breathing difficulties. The reaction tends to happen immediately within seconds or up to an hour. And how much can trigger that reaction can be as small as 1 molecule, so very, very small amount. Food intolerance, these are non-immune mediated. So this is actually instead due to the way that the body processes a food. Symptoms could be gas, bloating, diarrhea, and cramping. And an example of this would be a lactose intolerance. So lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. And if you don't have enough of that enzyme, or you have too little of that enzyme, it's not going to be able to break down that lactose, and then you're going to have some GI upset. So that's what's going on in that situation. And then lastly, what we're going to focus on for the rest of today is the food sensitivity. So this is immune mediated. The mechanisms, there are a few different ones. It could be IgG, IgM, complement, or white blood cells. It is defined as any immune-mediated non-type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. So this terminology I know is pretty wordy. And the reactions here can be delayed for hours or even up to days. So that does make them hard to kind of pin down what is causing what symptom, because the reactions can be delayed. Versus with the allergies, you get those reactions pretty quickly. So you're able to really figure out what food caused it. And as far as how much to trigger a reaction, that is dose dependent. I just found my toolbar. I see someone had a chat. I will check that later. So the amount of food that you have, as that increases, the effect or the adverse symptom may be more pronounced. So as you eat more of the food, you might have more of a reaction to it. And here's a visual to kind of explain that in a different way. And I like pictures and visuals, so I thought this was a nice way to kind of lay out some of that same information from the previous slide and show how these terms are related. And for food sensitivities, there are 2 main pathways in which those reactions occur. It's the type 3 and type 4. So I'm going to zoom in on those. Type 3 reactions are known as immune complex reactions. These occur when IgG, IgM, or IgA antibodies bind to a food antigen and trigger white blood cells to release mediators, which cause symptoms. And for the type 4 reactions, these are known as cell-mediated reactions. These occur when the white blood cells are independently triggered to release mediators without the involvement of those antibodies. So both of these types of white blood cells are, both of these types tell the white blood cells to release the mediators, and that can be that delayed onset that I mentioned, up to 72 hours. And the symptoms can manifest in all parts of your body, so it could be causing a lot of different things. So when you're thinking about food sensitivity tests, you want one that will be able to measure different types of these pathways. So food sensitivities make a person feel sick because the immune system is reacting to a food and causing that release of chemicals that are called mediators. And these could be things like histamine, prostaglandins, cytokines, etc. There are other types. There's actually a huge long list. So for a lot of these in my slides, I just put etc. to include other things. So if you want more information there, I can point you in the right direction. It does get pretty complex. And so those mediators are released from your white blood cells. And it's those mediators that are the actual substance or thing that is causing inflammation, causing pain, and causing other symptoms that you have with food sensitivities. So as I'm sure you're probably seen, because we've already gone through some slides, these food sensitivities are very complex. It's a very complex reaction in our immune system that's going on. There are also another layer of complexity because there are different cells that have different profiles of mediators. There's many different mechanisms that cause the mediators to be released. And of course, there are different mediators themselves. So these are the summarized steps of how food sensitivities cause inflammation. So the first step is that the immune system identifies the food or substance as foreign. And then the triggering mechanism triggers the immune cells to react. So it's kind of like calling in the troops. And then the chemicals are released from the immune cells to go destroy the invader. And then it's that release of chemicals that travels into your bloodstream and causes symptoms in your body. So I have some listed here. It could be pain, edema, smooth muscle contraction, increased gut permeability, also known as leaky gut. So I'm going to stop for a second and see if I can check the chat. Oh, that was a chat to feel free to ask questions. Okay, great. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will get to them later. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Let me get back to my slides. All right, and talk about elimination diets. And then we'll come back at the end to food sensitivity tests and tie back to some of those slides that I just went over to cover the basics. So you've probably heard of elimination diets. They're really popular and they're out there in the world and in the media. And basically what these diets do is they help you identify food sensitivities by trial and error. So basically you remove a food and then you see what happens. So I have some slides to kind of call out like how to do it and then some other components of elimination diets. And you will have access to these slides. I just talked to the Hope for HS people on this call, and they are going to, I think, put the slides on the website. So you will have access to those later. And my email address is at the end too, if you have any questions. So the elimination diet is a tool to identify food sensitivities and foods that may be triggering symptoms. And the whole point is to remove your trigger foods, and that will allow your body to recover. The time frame of how long you want to do one of these diets is about 4 to 6 weeks, so it is limited. If you do it longer than that, it can lead to, like, if you're eliminating a lot of foods, it can lead to nutrient deficiencies, basically. And so when you are trying this diet, the first thing you do is you eliminate one type of food or the most common triggers. And I do want to note that more is not always better here. It's easier to follow if you have just a couple things you're eliminating at first. And it can be really stressful to follow a diet like this, and can be really stressful to eliminate a lot of different types of foods. So make it easier on yourself and just start with a couple things, and it'll be more enjoyable too. So the usual suspects, if you had to pick three, are gluten, dairy, and sugar. And so you start with eliminating one food, and then if you're not feeling better, you can continue to eliminate foods. So that is the approach there. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. Is there a way to prevent LGS? I'm not sure I know that acronym. If you can put that in the chat, that'll help me answer the question. And then, is there a better way to do an elimination diet? That's a good question. I have some more slides, and then I'll let you draw your own conclusions. So on this slide, we have the common food triggers for allergic and inflammatory reactions. And I highlighted in green the top three that I mentioned on the previous slide. And then also I have a star next to the ones that are also like the top 8 food allergens. Leaky gut syndrome. Okay, thanks for that. So what was the question? Is there a way to prevent it? That would be, that's a longer answer. Let me come back to that question. Thank you for asking. Oh, come on. There we go. So I do like to focus more on what foods are left that you can eat, foods that you can enjoy. So I have a slide here for different ideas that are usually allowed in elimination diets. However, it does depend on what foods you're eliminating to begin with. So there's not an elimination diet isn't just one thing. You are deciding what you're eliminating. So it can really highly vary. So these are just some options that you can have. So for meat, usually chicken, turkey, lamb, and fish are good options on elimination diets. Vegetables, pretty much all those are great. That's also good for your microbiome, which can help prevent leaky gut. I kind of tie that in. Nightshades, sometimes those vegetables can cause issues. And I think in the next few slides, I have a list of what those are if you're not familiar. Grains, whole grains like brown rice, quinoa, and then buckwheat and millet are kind of more non-traditional foods. So you may or may not be familiar with those, and you may or may not be eating those. Lentils can be helpful. And then fruits like berries that are really high in antioxidants, which are great. And spices can be helpful. You can continue the garlic and onions, but sometimes people have issues tolerating those foods, or they might cause either like bloating or reflux. So again, it's just something to keep in mind and potentially eliminate if you are having those symptoms. And then sea salt to taste. So other foods that are good to eat and to include are anti-inflammatory foods. So these include our omega-3 fatty acids, which you get from fatty fish. So salmon, mackerel, cod, tuna, and sardines. So I think you've seen fish come up a couple times in my slides. And extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds. So that's almonds, walnuts, and flax seeds. Dark leafy greens like kale, broccoli, collards, cabbage, etc. And then red and blue foods. So these, any food, the part that gives it color is those are phytonutrients, and those are really great anti-inflammatory components. So red and blue especially have a lot of those, but all of the colors have components that are good for you. And so that is why, like, you'll hear some health providers say, like, to eat the rainbow and make sure you're having a lot of different fruits and vegetables and different colors, because you're getting a different combination of vitamins and minerals and different phytonutrients and that have anti-inflammatory properties. I see a question about brewer's yeast. Is it brewer's yeast or all yeast? I do have a slide about yeast kind of towards the end, and it's brewer's yeast, baker's yeast, and I'm forgetting the third one. They're all the same type. It's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So that's another question I can come back to through email if I need to. I can't remember that third one. I say it all the time, but it's not on the tip of my tongue. So for this, I like this infographic quite a bit. Harvard Health has a lot of really good nutrition information that does follow the science. So if you are looking for some good resources, you can check out, they have a lot of like blogs I've noticed and over the years. So that's a nice source. So here they kind of summarize the foods that fight inflammation. So we have the tomatoes, fruits, nuts, olive oil is showing up again, and the fatty fish is showing up again too, and the leafy greens, of course. And then at the bottom, talking about foods that do cause inflammation, like the fried foods, sodas, refined carbs, lard, and processed meat. Yes, Marilyn, thank you. I think it is nutritional yeast. You solved the mystery. So after you are, so you're on an elimination diet and you stopped eating whatever foods that you've stopped eating, and it's been about 4 to 6 weeks, then it is time to reintroduce those foods. And then so I recommend using a food journal when you do this, because then you can write down like which food you ate and like what your symptoms were. So the whole goal is to try that food again and then to watch for symptoms. And when you are reintroducing those foods, you can aim for 1 new food a day or 1 new food every 3 days. So most symptoms, if you're going to have a reaction, will occur within 48 hours. But as I mentioned earlier, those reactions can be delayed up to about 72 hours. So if you want to be on the safe side, you can do every 3 days, or if you're not really noticing any issues, you can do every day a new food. And so if you have the food, like say it's corn, if you ate some corn and then you do notice that you have some kind of adverse reaction, then how you would handle that is you would keep it out of your diet for a little bit longer and then try it again later. So you can, so this process will kind of take a while and you're kind of like doing some guesswork and trial and error. But once you've figured out what foods are, the ones that cause symptoms, you can choose to keep those out of your diet, or you can continue to eat them in small amounts if you want to. So tips for success is always to plan. Having healthy foods in your pantry and in your fridge makes it a lot easier to handle it when you're hungry and you're looking for something to eat. Check the ingredient labels. Those trigger foods can be hiding in a place you might not suspect. Soy is in almost everything, a lot of packaged things. And there's gluten hiding in a lot of places if you're trying to eliminate that. And you'd be surprised once you start reading labels, if you haven't already, the different types of foods that are in there. It's also important to eat regular meals and snacks and have that consistent meal timing, and to avoid being hungry for a long time. And then, of course, drinking water is great for your body to hydrate your tissues and to help with detox and just overall hydration. So this guideline here is pretty general. It's 6 to 8 ounce glasses a day is what's recommended for everyone. But that does depend on like the type of activity you're doing and different factors like that. And then lastly, making sure that you're getting sleep. So sleep is important for your health, and it also helps reduce inflammation as a bonus. So another thing that I like to talk about is not just nutrition, but like your whole health. So whole health includes your mental, emotional, and physical health. And although elimination diets are considered the gold standard for identifying food sensitivities, following these diets can lead to feelings of deprivation and stress, which can be harmful to your health. So the mindset is really important to help you on your healing journey. And so I did want to make sure that I mentioned that today. And I have some tips here on how to maintain a positive relationship with food while you're doing something like this. So your mindset, keep your goal in mind. You want to eliminate symptoms, not pleasure in eating. So reframe your elimination diet as a way to eliminate your symptoms and help you start to feel better. And then if someone asks you what you're doing, or why you can't go eat all that party food, you can explain that you are following an eating plan to eliminate symptoms. Kind of like a different way of saying it. Instead of, oh, I can't have all that, it's I'm eating in this way to make myself feel better. So here are 3 tips for this as well. So make sure that you do eat enough. A lot of times if you're following a special diet, it's easy to not eat enough. So that might surprise you, but don't let yourself go hungry. Make sure that you are focusing on getting enough to eat, and then in particular adding in more protein, fat, and vegetables to satisfy your hunger. And remember that these eating plans are meant to be short term, about 6 weeks. Anything longer than that, you do want to work with it like a dietitian or your medical doctor or some kind of healthcare professional that can help you make sure that you're doing it in a safe way. And so that will also make sure that you're avoiding nutrient deficiencies if you're just doing it short term. And then lastly, be brave. Don't be afraid of that reintroduction phase, because that phase is really essential in helping you build your own optimal food plan. And the whole goal of doing this process for elimination diets is to identify the least restrictive eating plan that will keep you feeling well. And most importantly, remember to do something that feeds your soul every day. So take a nature walk, talk with friends or family, breathing deeply, listening to music, reading, writing, or anything else that brings you joy. So I have the nature walk picture here because that's what I like to do, to make sure I'm getting in some things to feed my soul, and I love going on hikes with my dog. So I'm going to pause here for a second and see if there's any more questions before we get to the next section on food sensitivity. Okay. So if you do have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. So for the next section, I'm going to talk about the food sensitivity tests, the different ones out there. So we do have, oh, I see a question coming in. Are elimination diets considered best practices for managing HS these days? So I wouldn't say that we've identified a best practice for managing HS. Elimination diets can be, yes, a dream. So more research is always needed. I think I'm going to answer your question. Like I said earlier, I'd like you to draw your own conclusions about what might be the best thing. So I think that there is definitely a place for elimination diets and food sensitivities in HS, which is why I'm talking about it. But I don't think we don't have enough evidence or research at all really to say that anything is going to for sure help. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So on this slide, we have the different types of food sensitivity tests. And so remember that these do not diagnose food allergies, as that is a totally different mechanism that we talked about earlier today. And I had a slide about it. And so it's a different branch of that flow chart. I hear that a lot in critiques of the food sensitivity test, is that they don't diagnose allergies, but they're not designed to. So that's why I felt it was important to put on my slide. And funny enough, because I was just saying this to answer that question, all of these testing methods need further study. We always need more research to show us like what the evidence is saying. So just keep that in mind too as we go through these slides. So the first one is Eliza IgG. And I did want to say that the immunoglobulins are antibodies in your blood. And so this test is quantifying how much IgG you are producing to a specific food. The pros of this test is that it's accurate. It does accurately measure those IgG levels, which is great. However, some of the cons, the high level of IgG could be good, suppressing of an immune response, or it could be bad, causing an immune reaction. And the test doesn't tell you which one it is. So just because it's high, if you take that food out of your diet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll feel better, because we don't know if that high IgG level meant that it was doing something good or bad. It does test one mechanism, the type 3, and it does not test for chemicals. So the Elk test is next, and this is a cell-based blood test, and it assesses the changes in your white blood cells when exposed to food antigens. And so pros, it can detect both type 3 and 4 food sensitivities. It has a pretty large testing panel of 357. And this is a good method, but it is older and it has been replaced by the MRT. And this was invented by the same guy, Dr. Pasula. So it's still a good test, but the practitioners who were using that are now using the MRT. So it's kind of replaced it. So the MRT, let's see, the mediators are what is causing the food sensitivity symptoms. So that's why it's important to measure those. And so in this test, it's testing those mediators. So it's a cell-based blood test again, and it assesses the changes in your white blood cells when exposed to food antigens. So it does capture several different mechanisms because it is testing a little more downstream those mediators. And I'm gonna show a slide in a couple slides to kind of explain this a little better. And it tests 170 foods and chemicals. And the MRT is measuring that release of mediators, which is the event that happens right before the inflammatory reaction takes place. And the cons are, because it's measuring kind of more downstream, it's hard / impossible to figure out like what caused what. So if you are trying to pin down like what mechanism is causing what reaction, this test is not great for that, because it's just capturing overall if there is a reaction in your blood cells, an immune reaction. So it won't tell you like what mechanism it was. And then the LRA by Eliza Act test is a little bit of a mystery. This one is not, it doesn't have very many studies attached to it. They're a little vague in their methods and how they are conducting the test. So what I was able to find out is that they use lymphocytes and they're exposed to antigens and that cell responses study. So it is a type of cell test. They do have a big panel, 504 antigens. The details are vague, so they don't have any published studies on their methodology or the efficacy. So that means if it's working, or if their testing method is accurate. And then what I did find too is that the results are averaged. So if they're averaging the responses, that could lead to error. So I think there was a question about yeast, and I wanted to bring in the HS specific research, and I have one slide, everyone, just one slide on HS specific research and food sensitivities, but it's better than none. So if you haven't heard of these yeast studies, this is pretty cool. I think they're out in France, I believe this one is, and they actually have a few papers published about this, and this paper was in their results after 6 years. So after the 6 years from the original study, which is really, really cool that they were able to follow up. So in this study, they tested out a yeast-free diet. And of the 37 who followed a yeast-free diet, 70% had improved HS when they eliminated the yeast. If some of them accidentally ate it, so 87% of those who accidentally or on purpose ate the yeast, they had a recurrence of their HS within a week. And then this is the part that's relevant to the talk today. So they tested 4 of those 37 people for food intolerance using an IgG test. I wonder why it was only 4. I don't have the answer to that. And so of those, I guess, 4 that they tested, they found a yeast sensitivity in 20%. And so this is the IgG that they saw in the blood. A wheat sensitivity in 29%, and a cow's milk sensitivity in 23%. So what the authors suggested was that perhaps a form of food intolerance might be a missing link in understanding HS. So I think that's really cool. And I use a type of food sensitivity in my practice, and so that's why I wanted to tell you all about this and bring up this research article. So I'm bringing this slide back up. I talked about it earlier, and now I've added an orange, kind of where those tests are landing. So under mechanisms, we have the antibody-based test, and some immunologists do consider the IgG to be the gold standard because it has been used in a lot of studies. But remember, those high IgG responses don't necessarily mean that it's causing symptoms. So those can be confusing. And then the rest of the tests are pretty much going to be falling in the cell-based area. So the LCAT was replaced by the MRT, and the LRA does appear to be a cell-based test, although there's still a bit of a mystery. And so the MRT, the mediator release test, is measuring those release of chemicals that travel into the bloodstream and cause symptoms. So to me, that's why it's most useful to look at that test, because that is the step right before you're having those symptoms. So based on the information I just shared with you all, my professional opinion is that the MRT is the best food sensitivity test because it is able to measure those mediators being released, and those mediators is what's causing those symptoms. So just check in the chat, don't see any new questions. So I do have a few more slides to describe this protocol in more detail. So it's the mediator release test, is that blood test, and then the protocol that goes with it is called lifestyle, eating, and performance. So that's shortened to LEAP. And this is a personalized anti-inflammatory eating protocol based on that food sensitivity test, which is the MRT. And as I mentioned, it has been brought up that food intolerance could help us understand HS. So the MRT is actually able to account for that wider array of reactions than the IgG testing. And I also believe that the MRT is the most reliable and sensitive of the tests out there, which is why I use it. And so this test is telling you how strongly your immune cells react to foods and food chemicals. And most people do see an improvement in 10 days. However, that number is not HS specific. That's based on what it was used for first, which was fibromyalgia, IBS, and migraines. And here is an example of some results. So this is not even someone with HS, so please don't put any stock into, like, avoiding mushrooms and spinach. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just to show you what the results look like. And what's great about having this test is that you can see what foods your body is reacting to and which ones it does not react to. So it's very personalized. And so the test tells you which foods are safe to eat. And so these are the foods that you'll focus on eating for about 4 weeks to give your immune system time to calm down. And the whole goal is to reduce the inflammation in your body. And you can only eat the MRT tested safe foods and ingredients for a period of time. And if the food or ingredient isn't listed in your food plan, the idea is not to eat it. And I'll talk more about that. And then after you start feeling better, you'll add in 1 new food a day and watch for symptoms. So that's why in the program, you do have to track your food and symptoms in a journal. So I think this is a good point to say that. So if you remember when I was talking about elimination diets, I was kind of saying that it's more of like a guesswork and trial and error. And yeah, it can take longer to figure out what foods are causing symptoms and issues. So if you do like the MRT or test or protocol like this, you can actually cut out that guesswork and get to feeling better faster, because you're testing the immune response in the blood to these foods. So you know which foods are low reactive, and then if you stick to those, strictly to just those foods, then you're going to help reduce inflammation in your body. So that is kind of one difference between the two protocols. And elite practitioners are often saying that it's kind of like a shortcut or like a reverse elimination diet. So I just wanted to point that out too. So elimination diets are still, I think, beneficial, and they have a role. And I just wanted to kind of compare and contrast that. So this is an example of a package of nutrition counseling that typically would accompany the MRT test and following that LEAP protocol. So doing that food journal every day and your symptoms, and then this kind of tells you when you'd add in some foods. And here are also some considerations to make sure that this program would be a good fit. And also like the time of year is good, because if there's like a birthday or a vacation or a holiday coming up, it can be hard to be following like an elimination diet or a strict diet, like protocol at that time. So that's why I like to kind of point out some of these things that you might want to think about first. So the first one is dedicating time to prepare and cooking meals at home made from scratch, eating only the foods on the LEAP nutrition plan for the duration of the program, which is 6 to 8 weeks. And so you might be wondering why that is, because on most diets, like you have a cheat day and it's like okay to cheat. But in this case, the cheating might be making you sick. So the foods that are not on your LEAP nutrition plan might actually be causing inflammation in your body. And on the next slide, I have a picture to help show that. And so to get the most health benefit and the biggest bang for your buck, I do recommend to avoid those outside foods until later in the program. And then other components that you want to make sure you're ready for is tracking everything you eat in that journal, which can be really tedious, but it is all in service of helping you figure out your food triggers and making you well. So that can kind of help. And then planning out all of your meals and snacks to make sure that you do have options available when you are hungry. And that there is a community, there's a Facebook group for LEAP MRT and a Pinterest page, which I think both of those social medias are getting kind of outdated. So I don't know I'm actually not on like TikTok or anything like that. So I'm not sure if we're going to switch to new platform or not. But I've heard that from some younger folks that I work with that I'm like, okay, I'm getting old. But Pinterest, you don't have to have an account. You can just like log in or you can just follow the link and still see those recipes. So anyway, here's that image I was talking about to help explain the previous slide and why it's important to avoid the outside food. So it would be impossible and really, really expensive if you were to find a food sensitivity test that tested like the thousands of food that are out there in our food supply. So if you are eating these untested foods, you might actually be exposing yourself to a food that you are reactive to. So that's why if you stay within your tested foods, it's the safe zone, and the inflammation and symptoms have a better chance of calming down quicker if you're just using your safe foods. And eliminating symptoms is the goal. So there is a point in the program where you start to add in, let me just go back a couple slides. I kind of skipped over it, but I do want to draw at this point. So the first 10 days, you're pretty strict eating just your green foods, and then a certain number of those. And then you can start to have one new food a day of your green food list. And then there is a place where you can add in your untested foods. So that would still be like single ingredients and like, I can never think of an example. I'm gonna have to write some down, but it's like beans, like green beans. I think that is a tested food, but if that was not a tested food, like that's a single ingredient that you could test in later. And then at the end of the program, once you're done, that is where I recommend testing in some more like complex foods or foods that have more than one ingredient in them to see if those bother you, because you've been really good with, being clean or I guess however you want to put it, or not having potential reactive foods. So then at the end of the program, before you go just like crazy eating whatever you want, it is a good time to continue testing and experimenting to see which foods you might have a reaction to and which foods you don't. So that's something I always recommend. And all right, that we're almost done. So 3 things that I hope you remember from my talk today is the mindset. If you are going to try a strict diet like this, elimination diet or the LEAP protocol or something along those lines, try to have the mindset of that you're eliminating symptoms and that you want to encourage healing. The next point is to keep a journal. I do find this tool like priceless in helping you figure out your personal HS triggers and what's going to help you once you kind of learn like if there's a certain thing that you can tweak ahead of time that might reduce flares. Anything that we can do to kind of reduce those is helpful. And then lastly, focusing on eating anti-inflammatory foods and limiting those inflammatory foods. So I did want to note that I am part of a newly funded research project. So excited to study nutrition's effect on inflammation and HS. And I have a link here on this slide to the HS Foundation, who is funding the project. And there's an article that announced the funding. And this is happening at the Department of Dermatology in Henry Ford. So thank you for your time and attention. And I think I have some chat questions. So I'm going to look at those. Let's see, we talked about yeast. What about that one? Where can you get an MRT test? That's a good question. There is, I'll have to maybe ask one of the admins how I should answer this question, but there is, you can look for a practitioner right on the website. And let's see, Angela or Athena, maybe you can send something out later too.
For dietitians specifically?
Yes, it's dietitians who are the lead practitioners typically.
Yes, if you have some lists, we can send that out.
Okay.
I know that Hope for HS doesn't have a list of that, but if you have a resource, we'd be happy to share it.
Yeah. It is something that I do, but there are other, I know this is a national support group, so that's a really good question. We do have a listserv, I think it's called, but I'm going to find that out, and it can be sent out or uploaded to the website. Okay, so thinking this, does it make a difference in children versus testing in adult? That is a good question. Do you mean, can you test children? Yes, we do the LEAP protocol in children. I'm not sure what difference you mean, but if that answers your question that we do it in kids, then that's great. If you have a further question, you can type that in the chat. Oh, Indiana specifically, okay. So again, I'll go back to the list that I'm going to help send out. And so uplifting. So I think support groups are really great for that social support. I don't know, does Hope for HS have a group specifically for kids or for parents?
We had one chapter in Virginia that did, but HS Connect has just launched a group for parents. So I'd check that HS Connect website to find that group.
Great. Yeah, I think that would be a good source too. I think I just saw it was like a camp or something. I just saw a post on one of my social medias that was HS related. Have you heard of that, Angela? There's like a camp for kids with skin.
Yeah, I was just starting to learn about this. I found the HS Connect website. So they have a link there for kids with dermatological conditions and some other like scholarship resources and other things on that website. So they really are doing a good job with kind of adolescents and young children with HS, and they have also an interview with a pediatric dermatologist too that kind of addresses some issues. So I'd recommend everyone go check out that HS Connect site.
Yeah, hopefully that helps answer your question, and hopefully those resources work out and are something that will be helpful to you. Thank you. All great questions. All right. Well, I definitely will still hang around to see if we have more questions. I know that was a lot of content and a lot of information. Immunology is tough. So that was my understanding of it. If anyone has like a medical degree and, you know, is an immunologist, I'm sorry, I probably like really simplified things. But yeah, I try to make it understandable to everyone, and it's kind of tough. So I do have another slide just with some further reading, a couple articles. I don't know if I'm clicking other things, I can't move forward. And then also that citation that I used for the yeast study. So the slides will be available to everyone, and then you can check those out if you want to.
All right. Well, thank you. So we always like to take a moment to thank presenter. Thank you for your time. You know, we know that everyone's busy, so we really appreciate you, and we appreciate all of our participants. And next month's session is going to be about antibiotics and the role of bacteria in HS. So if you've registered for this webinar, you're automatically registered for the next one. So we hope to see you next month. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you again.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you,
Have a good
Jillian.
night.